Well, friends, good morning. We're talking, of course, unequal society, and as you can see, the topic given to me is rethinking energy India. Um, so I'm going to start now with these three pictures. I don't see the pictures on the screen. I see the picture here, not on the screen. Yeah. No, no, go. Don't read. Go the first. Let's be careful. Yeah. Yeah, that I know. All right, finally, Pandit Nehru and can anyone here identify the picture in the middle? Anyone in the room? K.D. Malviya, India's first petroleum and natural gas minister, in a way father of India's petroleum and natural gas sector, and of course Dr. Homi Bhabha. When you look at these pictures and pictures of these three great men, if you ask me, they are the founders of modern India's energy sector. Pandit Nehru, great visionary, not only when it comes to issues like democracy, politics, social welfare, foreign policy, non-alignment, but if you ask me above all, because energy is my sector, energy, and energy self-reliance. And K.D. Malviya works very closely with Pandit Nehru. And one of the reasons that the headquarters of ONGC is in Dehradun is because Mr. Malviya was from that part of India, or that part of Uttar Pradesh. And Pandit Nehru was also very fond of Dehradun. And also, in those days, geologists said that, look, that part of Himalaya is actually floating on oil. That was, of course, the scientific reason. But ONGC headquartered there, and no doubt about it that, and Dr. Homi Bhabha, I don't need to, everybody knows about the contribution of Dr. Homi Bhabha. So these three great Indians, these three great men basically laid the foundation of modern India's energy sector. Great work, great visions, and absolutely no doubt about it that they helped, or they laid the foundation from where we stand today. But then, by 1970s, these great men, after doing their great service to the nation, went away. And by 1970, when you look at India's energy sector of India was basically, by middle of 1970s, 78, so was crying for reforms, was crying basically for changes. But we all know the history. That didn't happen. The result? See this picture. And today, the reality is that we have 300 million people, 30 crore people who have no access to electricity, not even single electric bulb. 30 crores. Maybe more. Some people actually say 40 crores. We have 700 million people living below energy poverty line. We all talk about, below poverty line, but energy poverty, 70 crores people living below energy poverty. They may have access to one bulb or maybe a scooty, but probably don't have sufficient money to buy more than 2 liters of petrol, etc., if you go on in that. At the same time, when you look at global data, we are among the poorest countries in the world when it comes to per capita energy consumption. At the same time, last year we spent $190 billion just to import fuels, oil, gas, and increasingly coal. And by 2030, there's, kind of estimate done by my team and also by a lot of other people, that we would require American dollar 1.2 trillion every year for importing fuels, oil, gas, uranium, and coal. The question is where that money is going to come from, number one. Number two, that would leave us very, very vulnerable as far as global economy or the fundamentals of our economy or our international interests are concerned. And the result is that today the entire energy sector, I don't want to get into politics or blame any political party for that. The fact is the entire energy sector today is praying for a new dawn. Entire energy sector, oil, gas, coal, utilities, even the nuclear sector, they are all praying and crying for a new dawn. Now, what should we be doing as a nation? As did the Republic of India, we, 1.26 billion people of India. I think the time has come for us to try to create a new energy order. A new energy order which is basically looking at energy, air/environment, and water more holistically, in a more integrated way. Now, how do we do that? At the government level, at state level, at the political level, at the administrative level, I think that is something we need to study more carefully. But I think we need to build a new energy order, which is kind of, energy plus air, environment plus water. And we need to look at all these three things in a more integrated and more holistic manner. Second, that we need high level, probably Prime Minister and CM, PM, CM, kind of center state energy council. What's happening that you look at power, for instance, many of you actually focus more on power than oil and gas or other things. And we see that, there is actually lack of coordination. Power is for instance, is a concurrent subject. Center plays a very big role, but at the same time, when it comes to taking power, to your door, is the responsibility of the state governments. And we have seen where you have good governance, actually the energy governance is better. Where there is a poor overall governance, like in my home state, Uttar Pradesh, energy governance is actually equally bad, very bad. And so we need to do something. So if there is a PM-CM Energy Council, which meets maybe every third month, I think we will see a great transformation when it comes to the energy sector of India. And the third point, which is very important, I think time has come for us to go for something, there is no actually such word, called futurization. Basically making companies and the sector future ready. My own assessment is that our coal or oil or gas or power, nuclear, renewable, we are not future ready. So we need futurization of the energy sector as a whole, which means that power utilities in various states, are they future ready? Answer is no, they're not. In fact, some of them are look like entities in the 1950s. Nothing has happened there since the 1950s. That's the kind of impression you gather. ONGC, is ONGC future ready? Don't go by only the quarterly results or annual results. No, ONGC is not. For instance, last 13 years, they are struggling to do anything successfully in deep water. That's where the future is. Have they succeeded? No, they haven't succeeded. Oil output has gone down. Gas output has gone down. Look at the quality of management. Look at the quality of technology they are using. ONGC, and compare ONGC with Petrobras 20 years ago, Petrobras of Brazil or CNPC of China. 20 years ago, they were more or less of the same size as ONGC, and today Petrobras is soon going to be, by 2020, probably the biggest oil company in the world. CNPC is already a $350 billion company, and where is ONGC? So we have to basically do something, make them future ready. It's futurization. The same goes for Coal India. My view is that unless and until we reform Coal India, and we do something drastic, something actually revolutionary, we'll not be able to change the energy landscape of this country. Coal India is central to the entire energy sector of this country. So we need to reform that. And same with when it comes to NHPC and, as I said, state utilities, discoms, and so on and so forth. I think time has come for us to really think seriously and also at the same time do whatever is necessary. We need to think out of the box. Please do that. And we have to do it as a nation because on this we will require certain consensus. In the sense, energy is 90% politics world over, and India is no different. Whether it's power sector, coal sector, oil and gas, the political component in the energy is very high. In some countries it's almost 100%. In India it's almost 90%. So therefore it is very important that we build a consensus and go for futurization of the entire energy sector. You would be surprised to know that we still don't have a national renewable energy policy in this country. We don't have. We don't have a Renewable Energy Act, for instance. So I think the time has come for us to come out with a national renewable energy policy, because without a policy, it's very difficult really to A, identify the direction, and B, to build kind of policy architecture that you need to build, and to build a kind of national consensus that you need to build. Next, you see, when you look at energy sector as a whole, the role of private sector is still very, very small. Very small. And I think when you look at the ground realities in India, and for that matter, the ground realities around the world, we need to do something. We basically have to make, on the one hand, public sector companies absolutely world-class, very efficient. But at the same time, we have to create a kind of environment and ecosystem so that the private sector can play a bigger role. And we need to work in the direction so that over the next 10 years, the role and the share of private sector is almost 50% from top to bottom across the energy value chain, so that the private sector and the innovation and all that can also, can contribute, and there can be fair, healthy competition between the private sector and the public sector. At the same time, we have many companies, for instance, which have played very important role. We need to encourage them more. At the same time, there is, for instance, the way we look at our highways. When you look at highways, there is a potential. And some of you, those who really follow that more closely in terms of technology and other innovations, would probably agree with me that there is a potential to convert many of our highways into energy expressways. Energy expressways means basically having highways with a lot of infrastructure and facilities, also using the highways for producing solar power, having solar panel, and at the same time using those for distribution of gas, distribution of LNG, and distribution of other sources of energy. And then basically connecting and setting up township along the way, which you can call them smart city or energy smart cities, so that we can actually create more jobs on the one hand, at the same time help modernize the national economy at the same time. And when you look at some of our cities, for instance Kanpur or Patna or Jaipur, some of these cities are actually almost, in terms of population, they are as big as some countries in Europe. For instance, Kanpur probably is home to more people than the total population of Norway. So why can't we think a little bit out of the box, and both center and state try to find a solution so that we can help these cities to A, build their own energy vision, generate their own energy vision, develop their own energy policy, their own energy tariffs, and their own energy administrative infrastructure. They can become basically self-sufficient. They can be kind of islands. So if we can identify, let's say for the sake of discussion here, 40 such cities across the country, we'll have these 40 islands, and they should be basically be developed on PPP model, where private sector is playing a big role, that city is playing a big role. Some of you may say, oh, cities don't have that kind of capacity. They can't really do that. Help them. Help them build that capacity. But that is the way forward, because we need to decentralize, and we need to empower these cities. Nuclear power, very important. My personal view is that nuclear power, country like us, densely populated, population growing, and with so much of energy poverty, we need to look at nuclear power with greater enthusiasm, And we need to invest more in terms of research and development in nuclear power. We need to customize nuclear power for our requirement. And at the same time, you see, if there are some doubts in the minds of the people, that we see these days in Tamil Nadu, we see that in Gujarat, we see that in Haryana, it's important to engage the public opinion. If they have some questions, we need to sit with them. If they have some doubts, we need to sit with them. And this kind of attitude that you see today, you say, I want nuclear power, but not in my backyard. Some chief ministers are saying, we want nuclear power, but not in my home state. I want power, but not the nuclear plant. I think this is something which is maybe largely based on ignorance, and therefore it is important to engage the public opinion. And finally, on this, I think we need to give a great push to renewable energy. For a very long time to come, we have no alternative but to depend on traditional or conventional energy. In my view, oil probably will remain important for next 25 years, very important. Gas probably will remain very, very important, almost central, and the same with coal for next 50 to 60 years, as far as India is concerned. And maybe 2050 beyond, 2060 beyond, probably bulk of energy, most of energy is going to come from nuclear and solar. In a way, I was just having this chat yesterday with a colleague of mine, and I said, when you look at it, actually all nuclear, because what is solar? Solar energy in a way is also nuclear energy, because sun in a way is a nuclear reactor. So that energy is also coming from that nuclear reactor, plus we have to build our own nuclear reactors across the country. But it's important these nuclear reactors are so safe that, and we have to invest so much in R&D that actually in time to come, maybe by 2070, even our watch may be running on nuclear power. So we have to, the question is, can we make nuclear power absolutely safe? And we also have to contribute in that direction. Now, energy, as I said earlier, is 90% politics. So therefore, we as a nation, we one of the fastest growing economies in the world, we one of the largest economies of the world. I think it's important that we look at energy. When we are rethinking energy, we also look at the world very, very closely in terms of what is going on there. Excuse me, this is, can you just, well, here you have a picture of the president of Russia, and we have seen that Russia, as far as energy is concerned, is a superpower. We have also seen that how smartly Russia has used energy, oil and gas in particular, and also nuclear, in such a way that energy has served their interests very well. And and since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we all know that what happened to Russia. But last 4 or 5 years, Russia has reached where it has reached thanks to the energy sector. And their companies such as Gazprom has played a central role. So therefore, I think we need to deepen our energy ties with Russia, and we need to deepen our collaborative ties with Russia and collaborate with them, and collaborate with them in India, in Russia, in Arctic area, in eastern part of Russia, and at the same time, collaborate with them in third countries, including the Middle East and Africa. Well, you all recognize this picture. If you ask me to kind of identify a grand master of energy power play, I will vote for her. Look at the way she has used energy on the one hand for internal politics, but at the same time, build an energy security order for Germany, which is absolutely remarkable. Same German chancellor, the same political party, only until a few years ago, they say, we are against coal contaminated, shut down coal power plants. Now they are building more coal-fired power plants, importing coal from Germany. They also have their own sources, but they are also importing from the US. But at the same time, when it required, she changed the policy. Very pragmatic. And at the same time, look at, for instance, Germany's policies with regard to Russia over the Ukraine issue or this Malaysian aircraft tragedy. Very pragmatic. Your energy, national interest come first. And if we need to learn that, as I said, the grandmaster of this, I think she is the person, and Germany is something that we should get learning from. But not only politics, but green at the same time making sure that you build energy ties with the friendly countries and with other countries in such a way which are sustainable and at the same time which are in your national interest. President Obama, those who remember President Obama before he became the president, just go to Google and search his speeches before it actually moved into the White House. His speeches was always about our renewable energy and green energy. President Obama was all the way only for one source of energy, that was green energy. And today, read his speeches, listen to him. It's all about shale gas. Because shale gas became a reality. And as a smart politician, as a good politician, as a great president taking care of the national interest, suddenly the narrative changed. Everything changed. Because shale gas helped America become, to a very great extent, self-sufficient in terms of energy. And of course, this has created some problem for us. Shale gas means the US interest, strategic interest, military interest in the Middle East probably would change fundamentally in years to come. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen eventually. Now, we source 2/3 of our energy from the Middle East. When you look at overall our economic ties with the Middle East, I think they are in the region of about $250 billion. Import, export of petroleum products, remittances, and so on and so forth. $260 billion, and it's only going to go up. And if the US moves out of the Middle East, thanks to the shale gas revolution back in the US, what happens to our interest? What happened to our interest in the Middle East? Who would basically be the, making sure that the Middle East remains stable, geopolitically, politically, militarily? Is Saudi Arabia going to play that role? Probably no. Turkey? Not really. Egypt? Forget about it. China? India shouldn't let that happen. Russia? Probably not. So what's going to happen in the Middle East in 10 to 20 years from now? That's something that we, those involved in energy planning of the country, in the energy security of the country, actually should be giving us sleepless nights. I think we should be prepared to play a much bigger role. I'm not suggesting military role, but I'm saying that we should be prepared to play a bigger role, not because we are interested, not because we want to kind of play the role of hegemon. No, forget about that. It's mainly to protect our energy interests. What is the solution? What should be the way forward? What should basically be the kind of mechanism we'll be using? That we need to think about. But I think it's important. The shale gas revolution in the US actually has led to very, very difficult questions for us when it comes to particularly the Middle East. Now, here you see Prime Minister of Japan. As we all know, after Fukushima, the nuclear debate has gone in a different direction. Now, he is trying to basically bring nuclear power back to Japan, and that he's trying to restart nuclear power plant, but of course there is stiff resistance, not only from the grassroots, but there is stiff resistance at least from 120 members of parliament of his own party. So whether it's going to happen or not, I think is very important. What happens in Japan will have great impact on the energy, nuclear energy debate in the whole world, including in India. And I hope that Japan actually is able to restart some of the power plants and at the same time invest more in the safety of nuclear power as a whole. Well, you all recognize this picture. President of Iran. And I think Iran is the future energy superpower. When you look at their oil reserves, when you look at their gas reserves, second highest in the world, and at the same time when you look at the geographical parking. I think Iran is a country that we should build deep relationship with, and at the same time, Iran is a country we should try to understand. We take it for granted we know Iran. Sometimes I really wonder, do we understand Iran? Our neighbor and our partner for more than 2,000 years. But do we really understand Iran? Do people actually, the actors and the players in the energy sector in India, do they really understand Iran? My experience, I'm very honest with you, my experience is no. It's actually no. So we need to do something about it. We need to engage Iran, and at the same time, we need to be as smart as Iran. Iran is a very smart country. My personal experience is when I interact with Iranian diplomats, with Iranian oilmen, Iranian gas persons, I find they are actually some of the smart people on the planet. And at the same time, is Iran going to be the next hegemon in the Middle East? We don't know, but maybe. What happens if the entire Middle East is dominated by Iran and Israel together? Or would there be a kind of new Shia order in the Middle East? What would be the implication for the energy sector if that happens? Is something we need to keep a very close eye on, and at the same time strengthen our ties with the entire Middle East, and try to build bridges, try to invest more, try to also bring Middle Eastern companies to invest in India so that we can create some kind of interdependence. Right now, there is no interdependence. We're importing more, but if you really talk of interdependence, I think it's not there. We need to build interdependence with the Middle Eastern countries, particularly with Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran. That's what we need to do so that they come and invest in our infrastructure. They come and set up oil refineries here. They also invest in nuclear. They also invest in renewable energy, and we go and invest there. So build this interdependence. Maybe the time has come for us to set up a joint India-Middle East oil company, and also maybe an India-Middle East bank on the lines of BRICS Bank, for instance, so that in time to come, maybe in 25 years from now, we can build some kind of India-Middle East common market. It start with energy, and then basically, bring in other things into that. Now, these are the pictures actually I took. I was in the area very close to the North Pole, and this picture is basically, I have it in my presentation saying that when we talk of energy, when we talk of coal, when we talk of petrol, or when we talk of diesel economy and things like that, don't forget one thing. It's a beautiful world, it's a beautiful planet, and call it climate change, call it global warming, call by any name. But I think for us, those who play a big role in the energy sector, those who are players, it's important that we leave the world. Look at these pictures. It's actually a glacier which is melting away. So a bit disturbing when you go and see it there. And now look at this picture. Polar bear. Some people say that as long as polar bear is safe, our children are safe. Our future is safe. And we have to make sure that polar bear is safe. Because if polar bear is safe, we will leave a beautiful world behind for our children. Thank you.